I am someone who has never been content about being right without making sure it's done right. That's why today I am announcing my candidacy for governor of Illinois.
The field of Republican candidates for governor grew this week, but are any of them capable of taking on Democrat J.B. Pritzker? We'll talk about that and other news of the week on this edition of Capital Cast. Hello and welcome to Capital Cast, a regular podcast of Capital News Illinois. I'm Peter Hancock, here again with my colleague Ben Szalinski and our editor-in-chief Jerry Nowicki. We have mentioned on this podcast that the GOP slate for the 2026 elections has been a little slow to develop this year, but this week there was some movement. Two names were added to the field of potential candidates for governor. One made a formal announcement, and one let the word slip through leaks to the media that an announcement will be coming. We'll start with the formal announcement, which we just heard in the intro. That was Ted Dabrowski. Ben, why don't you tell us what we know about Ted Dabrowski? Who is he? Where does he come from?
Yeah, Ted is someone who's been around Illinois politics for a little while now. He is the president of the conservative research publication Wirepoints. They do a lot of work on researching various issues in Illinois, from crime to pensions and education, and a lot of very heavy stuff on budget issues mostly. So he's been pretty active in promoting generally conservative policy solutions to various problems that he's identified through research. He's very data-driven, very analytical. So he's kind of been around, in back circles of, the Republican Party is kind of this policy wonk. So that's kind of what he brings to the table. He's not so much like a polished politician, but rather somebody who's been very heavy on the policy side.
Okay, and before Wirepoints, which actually got going around, 2018, 2019, he was also involved in the Illinois Policy Institute, which is another kind of conservative think tank that was had some close ties to former Governor Bruce Rauner. Is it fair to tie Ted Dabrowski with the Rauner administration, or is that kind of ideologically the way he leans, do you think?
Yeah, that's hard to say, I think. I think in some ways maybe that sort of budget focus, like Bruce Rauner came into office very focused on budget issues. And that's a lot of what the Illinois Policy Institute and Wirepoints do, is talk about conservative solutions to the state's budget problems. Pensions is their favorite topic of both of those organizations. So I don't know, though, that he's necessarily kind of from the Bruce Rauner world. Jeannie Ives was there at his announcement today. She was the one who live streamed it, so the rest of us who weren't there could watch it. Obviously, we all know that she challenged Bruce Rauner, and she was almost unseated the governor in the 2018 primary. So I think he comes from a little bit more of a conservative point of view than Bruce Rauner did. Maybe a lot of the same, similar Republican principles on fiscal conservatism. But I think when it comes to social issues, I think we're going to see a lot more of a conservative personality come out of him. He's not really tied with the old establishment of the Republican Party. His ties are, people like Jeannie Ives, some people who run in a more conservative circle, but not all the way to the right, like the Freedom Caucus. They're in Darren Bailey world, of course.
Okay, and so the other candidate who kind of threw his hat into the ring this week was also the last Republican nominee for governor, former state senator Darren Bailey. He ran in 2022 and lost to Governor Pritzker by 12.5 points in the general election. 2024, he tried to challenge Mike Bost in the 12th District congressional seat in southern Illinois. He lost the Republican primary by a narrower margin. It was a little less than 3 percentage points. So I guess the question is, what does Darren Bailey bring to the race now that the voters of Illinois, and Republican voters in particular, haven't already seen?
That's a good question. I think that's what we're going to be watching for, especially when he announces his campaign supposedly in the coming days here. I think the trick for Darren is going to be he's going to have to separate himself from Donald Trump, and he's also going to have to separate himself from the image that he created of himself in 2022. He was a very conservative, firebrand kind of politician, very closely aligned with Donald Trump on just about every issue. That obviously is not a winning strategy in the suburbs. The suburbs have continued to trend away from the Republicans as Donald Trump has been either in office or on the ballot. So I think the trick here for Darren is he's going to have to find a way to attract suburban voters, probably with some sort of more moderate position. He talked so much about crime in 2022, and that was just an issue that simply didn't land with voters. Voters had other priorities in that election. So if he's out there using this message on crime again, which Donald Trump is already laying the groundwork for him to do, I don't know how much that's also going to resonate with voters, given the economy is such a big concern. And I think that's where a lot of Republicans want the focus to be, is on economic issues. So we'll have to see where Darren Bailey actually comes across as different than what he was 4 years ago.
Okay, let's turn to Jerry now. These are the two candidates, at least so far, that have anything like a statewide sort of base or statewide name recognition to them. There are a couple of other candidates, a county sheriff, Jim Mendrick, and a man named Joe Severino. Jerry, do any of these people have the kind of gravitas, I guess you would say, to run a statewide political campaign and even run competitively with someone like Governor Pritzker?
Yeah, it's not immediately clear to me how serious the Severino campaign is. I know Sheriff Mendrick was at the fair speaking to reporters, and he seemed, to be taking a pretty serious approach. I mean, he's focused on crime, as he would be as a law enforcement officer. And Ben, you'll have to refresh my memory when we asked him about Darren Bailey specifically.
Yes, he was asked about, the issue of crime, because he was only talking to us reporters about crime. And someone had brought up, Darren Bailey ran on this message in 2022. And Mendrick responded, well, the difference between me and Darren Bailey is I'm an actual sheriff and Darren Bailey's a farmer. I think that kind of offended folks in Bailey world, because, just because you're a farmer doesn't mean you're inferior on certain political issues. But I think that's why Jim Mendrick was sticking with the crime message, because he actually has delivered results on public safety.
But in terms of this election coming up, and of course, it's more than a year away, which is an eternity in politics. Crime and public safety is obviously an issue that people always care about. But do any of them bring anything to the table on any other issues, I guess, like the economy, employment, the overall state of Illinois?
The interesting thing will be to watch whether Dabrowski can sort of translate his, he even quipped in his news conference today, he's like, as much as I love graphs and numbers and data, the campaign will have to be more than that. And, we'll have to see how that translates in terms of economic policy, and whether he can relate that into specific legislation that he could pass and get Democrats in the General Assembly to get on board with. So, that's all going to have to remain to play out. But earlier you'd asked me about feasibility of a campaign. And, last cycle, it certainly looked like the GOP was putting its weight behind Richard Irvin, this mayor of Aurora, this solid candidate, this sort of establishment candidate, and he just got trounced by Bailey. So, gravitas, who knows what the Republican primary voters will want this year and how they'll be able to get their message out. But it'll be an interesting one to watch.
And that sort of raises the question, have we seen the entire field yet, or are there more names to drop in the future, do you think? Jerry?
We certainly got enough time for petitions to be filed. So if people are on the fence, if they don't like what they're seeing from Dabrowski or Bailey, then they could announce. But, when you raise money like Dabrowski has been, and you have the name recognition like Bailey, it could serve as a type of mitigating factor in terms of whether people decide to jump in.
Well, the other big news this week had to do with the naming of a new Supreme Court Chief Justice. Justice P. Scott Neville was chosen to serve a 3-year term leading the state's high court. He will succeed current Chief Justice Mary Jane Theis, who will stay on the court as an associate justice. Justice Neville is from Chicago. He is 76 years old. He will become only the second black Chief Justice in Illinois history. He was appointed to the Supreme Court just in 2018 and then was elected to a full 10-year term in 2020. And now in 2025, he is already the senior most justice on the court who hasn't already served as the Chief Justice, which is kind of how they're chosen, which says something about the court, that there has been a lot of turnover in the last few years. Jerry, talk to us a little bit about that, because you and I have both interviewed a lot of Supreme Court justice candidates. What's been going on at the court? Is this kind of a normal pattern, or are we seeing more turnover now than usual, do you think?
Yeah, 2022 was a particularly interesting time because we had David Overstreet, who was elected to the court in 2020. He was the newest, but then you had essentially 4 justices all joined the court in 2022. There were 2 of them were appointed, I believe. That was Lisa Holder White and Joy V. Cunningham were both appointed. And then they had Elizabeth Rochford and Mary Kay O'Brien win their races for the court. There was Justice Thomas Kilbride, who did not win a retention election, which opened up a seat, and then some retirements, and just generally speaking, there was another Justice, Michael Burke, who was ousted in the election that year. And part of that was because the Democrats in the General Assembly redrew the court lines that year, and it ended up in the 5-2 Democratic majority on the court that we now see. So kind of several factors.
Yeah, so several retirements, some changeover, election-driven turnover there, and then the redrawing of district lines. So I guess, what do we think that translates to in terms of, the type of court that we have now? Has there been like an ideological shift in it, do you think, or a political shift?
It doesn't seem like it. You don't see many 5-2 partisan line decisions. I interviewed now Chief Justice Mary Jane Theis. Her term will be up in October. I interviewed her when she became Chief Justice a few years ago, and she remarked to me that she didn't like that I mentioned the partisanship of the court in a previous story that I wrote. So she sort of tried to fiercely guard against that. But I mean, there's distrust in the courts, and I think the fact that it was Democrats drawing the line that made a more democratic court doesn't really sit well with people who are observing it. But in terms of their approach to decisions, I have seen, it's not uncommon at all to see Democrats and Republicans on the same side of issues, but there is certainly a partisan difference there between some of the judges.
Okay. Well, that's all the time we have for this edition of Capital Cast. Capital Cast is a production of Capital News Illinois, a public affairs reporting project of the Illinois Press Foundation with funding from the Robert McCormick Foundation. I want to thank both Ben Szalinski and Jerry Nowicki for helping out this week. Until next time, on behalf of the entire Capital News Illinois team, this is Peter Hancock saying thank you for listening.